The reason. Is that the clicker?
I got it. I got the clicker. Okay, perfect. Thank you all for joining. I'm Jennifer Jansen, Communications Director for Airlines for Europe. I'm joined by my colleagues Lorea Monsolides from IAG and Louise Grieb from Ryanair in the back. If you need anything, please let us know. At this time, we'd like to start the press conference. We'll start with some slides, followed by a brief Q&A. We aim to be done by around 5:30.
Okay, well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. We have a short presentation, only a handful of slides, and then Michael and I and Thomas will be happy to answer your questions. So, just here, this is air traffic control delay. There we go. So you may have heard us make comments in relation to this in recent weeks, but we've seen an alarming increase in the number of air traffic control strikes in Europe so far this year. 300% increase in the number of days impacted. We've already seen 24 days of strike. We expect that to increase to 28 days by the end of this month. In effect, you can say that 1 month out of the year has now been impacted by air traffic control strikes. The European Commission recently released some figures, and these were quoted in a French Senate report this week. They identified that 254 air traffic control strikes have taken place in France since 2004, and France alone is responsible for 33% of all delays in Europe. We commissioned a report by PwC which indicated that between 2010 and 2017, the economic impact of strikes in Europe amounted to about 13.4 billion euros. Now, the French Senate, interestingly, so not me, the French Senate report confirms that the right to strike has to be balanced against the obligation to provide public service. And both Ryanair and IAG plan to submit a complaint to the European Commission, which will be against the French government, because we believe that the French government is not adequately protecting the rights of Europeans to free movement and enabling flights over France to continue to be operated. Air traffic control strikes have a huge impact on consumers, a huge impact on the European economy, and, as I said, are restricting the fundamental rights of people to free movement across Europe. So we believe that this issue must be addressed. We're not denying the right to strike, but we're clearly arguing that there is a balance between what is a conditional right against a fundamental right that people have to free movement. Passengers overflying France are being denied their fundamental right of travel between member states that are not affected by the strike action. And we believe that there is legal precedent to this complaint, and we intend to bring this to the Commission. Now, if I move to the next slide, you can see, I think, a very good example of this, because the area most impacted by the strikes in Marseille air traffic control is actually in Barcelona. You can see in the chart here the area of airspace covered by Marseille air traffic control, extending into the Mediterranean. But when Marseille goes on strike, and they've been on strike, I think, for 10 weekends already this year, and have announced that they intend to be on strike again this weekend, it has a disproportionate impact on flights operating from Barcelona. In the days of the strike, we estimate that at least 50% of Vueling's flights are impacted by this. And we've seen a 12 times increase in the number of air traffic control restrictions that have been applied to Vueling flights so far this year. So this is impacting more on Spain, hitting directly on Spanish tourism, which, as you can see, represents about 11.5% of Spanish GDP and is responsible for about 13%, or just over 13% of all employment in Spain. And these continuous strikes are having a disproportionate impact on Barcelona. And as I said, you can see there from the location of the Marseille air traffic control area, if you're flying from Barcelona or the Balearics, or flying into Barcelona or the Balearics, you are directly impacted by strikes. But it even has a more heavy impact because strike action in Marseille pushes into Bordeaux and Paris. So it's not just the Marseille area that's getting impacted. So altogether, where Vueling will try and fly around Marseille, it has to go through Bordeaux, which is also having a knock-on effect. So up to 80% of flights can be impacted. So this is having a really significant impact on Spanish tourism. It will have a big impact on the tourism economies of the Balearic Islands and of Barcelona. And people are only beginning to notice what's happening. And this situation is going to get worse rather than better. Michael.
Thanks, Willie. And I think to put it in some context, in 2017, last year, there was 13, don't worry, you'll hear me, there was 13 days of air traffic control strikes. The worst year on record was 2016, when we had a total of 41 ATC strikes. Already this year, to the end of May, we've had 28 days of ATC strikes. So 2018 is going to be by far and away the worst year on record for air traffic control strikes. Already this year, and we're not in the first 5 months, 750,000 passengers have had their flights cancelled directly as a result of ATC strikes. And something needs to be done. As Willie said, obviously most of the egregious behaviour here takes place in France, but it's not confined to France. There's also staff shortages in Germany, staff shortages in ATC in the UK, that even on normal days are disrupting flights. Year to date, 70% of the total en route delays of over 15 minutes have been caused by air traffic control, staff shortages and strikes. 70%, more than 3/4. This is something that we're calling for immediate action on. As Willie has said, Ryanair and IAG are now taking legal action against the French government for breaching one of the 4 fundamental European freedoms, which is the free movement of people across the European Union. You can't have the free movement of people if a couple of hundred air traffic controllers in Marseille are going to shut down the skies over Europe on a regular basis. And already this afternoon, an hour ago, we got notification that yet again this weekend, on Saturday and on Sunday, Marseille air traffic controllers going out on strike, which will be the 10th, 11th weekend in a row that they have been on strike. Already today, the French air traffic controller, or the ATM provider, has requested Ryanair that we cancel 90 flights on Saturday and we cancel 90 flights on Sunday. A tiny minority, less than 10 of those flights are landing in France. These are flights that are operating between the UK going to Spain, Ireland going to Italy, Germany going to the Balearics and the Canaries. And you have to ask the question, why are Germans, Spanish, UK citizens being disrupted because a bunch of French air traffic controllers want to go on strike? What happens is the French use minimum service legislation domestically in France to require that they must operate the French domestic routes, and all of the capacity restrictions get shoveled onto the overhead of the en route providers. And we've got a couple of examples of how this, if we take the next slide, how this impacts individual flights. Here's a flight operated by Volotea going from Ibiza to Verona. Not even a long flight. It typically should take more than an hour and 15 minutes. This flight now on a day has to fly around Marseille ATC because they have the season slot they have, it can't be right. They fly across west, outside of Sardinia, up through Italy. It adds 30% length to the flight and 27% to the fuel bill. And just to put it in some context in the summer, yes, the flight arrives more than 30 minutes late, but it also means the next flight, the return flight, goes 30 minutes late. The following 2 flights that aircraft will operate later that day will operate 30 minutes late. And if that aircraft has to get to Germany late in the evening, when most of the airports have a noise curfew, it has no choice other than to cancel the flight. So this is not simply a measure that knocks onto one flight. It impacts all of the flights that day operated not just by Volotea, but by all of the European airlines. And we have some other examples here of how recent destinations across the EU during these French strikes. A BA flight from Faro to Gatwick has suffered a delay of 21 minutes. And then that will take knock-on delays on later flights out of Gatwick Airport that afternoon. A flight from Lisbon to Luxembourg takes a delay of 35 minutes. And a flight from Alicante to Newcastle. And the only thing these flights have in common is none of them are going to France. They don't carry any French people. Yet they have to overfly France, and yet Marseille closes down, and their freedom of movement is not just hugely delayed. Alicante to Newcastle, it has 3 hours and 3.5 hours, that flight. A holiday flight, families going abroad, stuck in the airport for 3.5 hours. And that's just not a delay of 3.5 hours on that flight. It means that the last pair of flights that aircraft will operate that day have to be cancelled. They can't be completed because they flow into the following day's flights. This problem is getting worse. We're highlighting it now because we've had a nightmare in May. 4 times more flights. 56,000 flights in May were delayed by over 15 minutes compared to 18,000 flights in May 2017. We have strikes, we have staff shortages. One remarkable statistic, 60% of the weather delays visited upon us by European ATC take place on Fridays and Saturdays. Now, we've all studied weather for many years, and we know that it is historically accurate that actually the worst weather always takes place on Fridays and Saturdays across Europe. Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays are usually the sunny days when you can go to the beach. But Friday and Saturday, as you know, we are visited with thunderstorms, fog, lightning, hellfire, and fucking damnation. We've written to the air traffic control providers, particularly in Germany, I have to explain why are 60% of the weather disruptions taking place on Fridays and Saturdays, and yet 40% of the weather disruptions take place on the other 5 days of the week. We await their reply with considerable interest. And this is because not alone are we suffering vastly more delays, vastly more cancellations, but these guys are frigging with the figures as well, covering up some of their staff shortages and hiding behind weather issues. We need this resolved. The A4E put a proposal to the European Commission over 18 months ago. Said one of the simple ways of dealing with strikes without removing anybody's right to strike is let's split the airspace over France. So above 30,000 feet becomes European airspace, below 30,000 feet is French or domestic airspace. That way you allow Eurocontrol or the other agencies to continue to do the overflights even if the French are on strike. So by all means, if the French want to go on strike, and we know it's a national pastime in France, if you want to go on strike, go on strike. But now at least the French flights will get disrupted, and the innocent flights operating from the UK, Germany, Spain or Italy will be allowed to operate. That's where it should lie. Sadly, we've had no action from the European Commission. We had a meeting today with Commissioner Bulc, who said, wrung her hands and said it's very difficult, but it's not our competence. We're waiting for some proposals from national governments. If you wait for a proposal from the French government to deal with or effectively remove the ability of these tiny numbers of air traffic controllers to disrupt European aviation, no progress will happen. So we're calling again today on the European Commission. We want action. We need action now. It is within the competence of the Commission to do something about this because this is disrupting one of the 4 fundamental freedoms of the European Union, which is the freedom of movement. And as has become apparent during the Brexit debate in the UK, Europe stands four square behind the 4 freedoms. Nothing is going to be allowed to impinge on the 4 freedoms unless, of course, you're a French air traffic controller, in which case you can fucking tear up the 4 freedoms, particularly the freedom to move, and block or close the skies over France. And with that, I hand over to Thomas for the summary.
Just a summary. Thank you, Michael. A summary of what we've done is A4E and where we're at today. So as many of you know, in 2016, as A4E was established, we made ATC strike disruption campaign one of our probably the top priority. So that's how we started. We launched an A4E free movement call for action, which you can see actually the original copy, if I may say, of the signature board here in the room. It lists the operational and political actions that we have undertaken, would like to see undertaken, and we've recommended these to limit the damage these strikes are having on tourism, passengers, and free movement of people, as we said. Without questioning work is fundamental right of strike. Let me repeat it, it's very important. The second thing we did is we launched a successful online petition called Keep Europe's Skies Open. Many of you, I guess, may have seen it. Some of you may have subscribed to it. Already hundreds of thousands of signatures from frustrated travelers figure on this online petition. Thirdly, I would say is that we pushed very hard, and we were successful in that sense for the European Commission to publish last June 2017 its communication Open and Connected in Europe. Basically, what it said is to improve service continuity in air traffic management, a 72 hours individual notification of strike participation by the controllers, the protection of peak traffic periods, and the protection of overflights, while not at the expense of flights to and from the country affected. Now, 1 year later, just to confirm what these gentlemen just have said, we have failed to see any positive, real positive impact on the field. As we've already heard, fortunately, France is in particular the world champion in ATC strikes. The country is a source of 67% of all disruptions. Now, although A4E is not considering at the moment as an association no legal action as yet, we are urging Paris to make a brave pro-European effort in order to swiftly address the problem. A report by the French Senate's Finance Committee, as we mentioned, was published on Monday, and it contains some good recommendations. It actually refers to the actions we have proposed earlier, but now it needs to be followed by political action. I would say the timing apparently is, of course, now very important with the summer coming up. We haven't seen the worst yet. The worst is still to come for this year. So with that, I conclude on a note of hope, but the need for urgent action now. Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas. We'll take a couple questions from the room. So starting with you, lady, if you can just say your name and where you're from. The lady in white, please.
Oh, yes, I'm Catherine. Go ahead.
We can hear you.
Yeah, okay. Why only IAG and Ryanair? I'm sure that most other airlines are impacted as badly as you do. I'm sure, within Airlines for Europe, you talk to your colleagues. So why did they not follow you in joining the legal?
Well, we've just recently identified what we believe is a legal precedent that operate into Barcelona or the Balearic Islands or into Spain. The impact on Spanish tourism is clearly much greater than on other countries. And then you've got to recall that tourism in Spain is a very significant part of the economy. So we're not saying that other airlines are not concerned. In fact, all of the airlines in A4E are concerned about this. But it doesn't require us to wait for everybody to come together and understand the problem. So, we've been happy at IAG to pursue this on our own. Ryanair the same. And actually what probably will carry more weight is that we do it collectively and individually. Because, to be honest, this will be a complaint to the Commission. And I would hope that, that this complaint will be supported by the Spanish government, because the impact on Spain, and I just take Spain as one example of this, is very, very significant. We've had one day in May where I think the punctuality at Palma Airport was 2%. So you think of that these are figures that are unheard of. When we don't have ATC disruption, and there is a level of ATC disruption pretty much every day, but when we don't have the disruption caused by strike, Vueling's on-time performance is in the 80s. So it's not an issue with the airlines. This is an issue that is being forced upon airlines and been forced upon our customers. And as Michael said, it's disrupting business, it's disrupting holiday makers. And it's got to a point where, no longer can we stand back and talk about the problem. We've got to take action, and we're demanding that the Commission takes action as well. So they have identified solutions. The idea of designating airspace above a certain level as European airspace, so that overflights can continue to operate normally. And that's principally what we're looking for. Why should Germans traveling to the Balearic Islands be impacted by a strike in Marseille? Why should German holidaymakers have their flights cancelled or face extensive delays because of a strike in France? It shouldn't happen. They have the right to move between Germany and Spain. Spanish people have the right to move from Spain to Italy. Their rights should not be trampled upon by air traffic controllers in France. So we're prepared to take action. We would hope that others will join us, but we're not concerned. I think the fact that you get IAG and Ryanair together talking about this issue clearly indicates that this is a problem that needs to be addressed. And therefore we will pursue this complaint both individually and jointly. And if others want to join us, they're more than welcome to join us.
Gentleman in blue.
Hello, sorry for going a little bit.
Please, your name first.
Yeah, off topic. I'm from the Norwegian Business Daily. A question for Mr. Walsh. Are you holding on to your shares in Norwegian, even as Lufthansa say they will maybe put an offer on the company? And how long are you willing to wait?
Lufthansa's going to make an offer for Norwegian. Already? I haven't even,
Well, they say they might, yeah. And also for Mr. O'Leary, will you take part in any bidding war?
Well, hang on. Before he answers, I'm not taking part in the bidding war, and I've made that very clear. I should point out that it's okay to talk about Norwegian because Norwegian flies from Barcelona and they are being heavily impacted by these strikes as well. But in relation to Norwegian, you've heard me say it's a company, well, it's run by an individual that I admire, Bjorn. I think he's done a great job. I admire his ambition and I admire his bravery. The company clearly is in a situation where its financial performance is very poor. We have had discussions with the company in relation to a potential bid that has not gone anywhere. We hold a small shareholding in Norwegian, 4.61%, which will be diluted down as a result of the capital, the new shares that they have issued. We are not participating in a bidding war. I've been very clear. If Lufthansa wishes to acquire Norwegian and is prepared to pay a price in excess of what we would value the company, they're welcome to it. I'm not sure that they would, and I've not heard that they would do it. I've heard Karsten's comments around everybody's talking to everybody, but we'll wait and see. But it's a deal that would be interesting for us. But if anybody thinks it's a deal that we have to do, or a deal that we're prepared to do at any price, well then, quite honestly, they're extremely foolish because that's not going to happen.
And from our point of view, I mean, we saw comments made by Bjorn a week or two ago that Ryanair had made an offer for Norwegian in the last 12 months. We've made no such offer in the last 12 months or ever. I've asked him to send me on a crate of what he was drinking at the time because it must be pretty good stuff. We will not be making an offer for Norwegian, not today, not tomorrow, not ever. I think, like Willie, Bjorn's a great guy, but the airline is a dog. It has never made any money. It is never going to make any money in the way it is presently run and operated. And the big challenge for Norwegian this year is it is unhedged. Last year it lost about 250 million when oil was at $40 a barrel. This year it'll lose about 600 or 700 million with oil at $80 a barrel. And while I wish whoever buys, I think it's inevitable that Norwegian will either will go bust or be taken over by somebody. And it's part of a consolidation, that is inevitably, inexorably rolling out across Europe. Willie has been one of the main drivers of that consolidation. Karsten as well has acquired a number of airlines. And the number of airlines in Europe is going to get smaller in the next number of years, but you'll have a number of much bigger, much better run airlines than Norwegian.
Okay, we have time for one or two more questions.
Simon Said
Same.
from Politico. I had a question if you could talk me through the legal action a little bit.
Yeah.
What does it mean to file a legal complaint with the Commission? What responsibilities or requirements does it have on the Commission to respond? Is it you taking them to court? What's next?
This is something we've just identified. We're working on it. So it will take the form of a complaint to the Commission. We will disclose fully what the nature of that complaint will be and what we will expect from it. But as I said, we've identified what we believe is a strong legal precedent. And on the basis of that precedent, where there was a ruling in the European Court in relation to activities in France, we believe that it gives us the option of pursuing this.
So you haven't yet?
We have not done it yet. As I said, this is something that we've just developed in the last few weeks. And quite honestly, we were optimistic based on the previous conversations we have had with the EU that these issues would be addressed. As Michael said, there has been this proposal about designating upper airspace as European airspace. If that were to happen, we believe that this problem would go away. It hasn't happened. We don't see that there is sufficient progress in relation to that. So therefore, we believe we need to take action to provide some incentive and impetus to the movement to get this changed. So our interest is in protecting the rights of Europeans to exercise what is a fundamental right, that they have freedom of movement, and that freedom of movement is not interfered by action that has been taken by people where their freedom is completely outside of the industrial action that has been taking place. So by all means, people are free to take industrial action where it's done according to the laws that apply. But any action that has been taken clearly has to be balanced against the fundamental rights that EU citizens enjoy.
And it's in the first instance, it's an action against the French government for a breach of the Treaty of Rome, one of the four freedoms of the Treaty of Rome. The Commission is the primary, is where we go in the first instance, and if we don't get satisfaction from the Commission, then we appeal to the European courts where We think it is a very strong case. As you know, commission decisions tend to be somewhat politically motivated, where it's much more likely, but we have to go through the commission in the first instance. Next question. Yes, sir.
Oh, Damon Wade from AFP, Ireland Front. I just wanted to clarify, this proposal about dividing the airspace at 30,000 feet,
Yeah.
was that made by your side or the Commission side? Because I think one of you said one and...
A4E.
It was actually an issue that we debated, but it was the formal proposal came from Commissioner Bulge and her team.
So it was the Commission that suggested that?
They actually came back to us at a meeting.
I thought it was Parliament.
Yeah.
Fine.
So
It's a great idea. We don't
yeah.
give a shit whose idea it was. Let's just implement it.
So it came up in a loose discussion, but they actually came back and said this is something that they're now formally going to pursue.
Correct. Except they haven't pursued it for 18
I
months.
was just going to say, is there something like EU airspace?
No.
Does that exist?
No.
It doesn't exist.
So this is one of the issues. What we've done is that there is a report where you can look at a comparison between European airspace and US airspace. As you know, in the US, it's a single air traffic air navigation service provider. In the EU, I think we've got about 40. But it's a very good comparison where it lists the amount of flights covered, the number of air traffic controllers. You know, the airspace is roughly the same. So, you know, there are benchmarks that can be used to identify whether European airspace is efficient, and it clearly isn't efficient. But part of the problem we face is that you have all of those, I don't know if you can put the chart back up there, all of these individual air traffic control centres. And, you know, in France, I think there are, is it five?
Five.
So you can see the way they're divided up there. So, you know, as we say, if you look at, you know, this is Marseille, which we say is, because of the extended airspace that it covers, is impacting disproportionately on flights that are going west, north, and indeed sometimes south out of Spain. So it's Spain that's getting hit by the strikes in Marseille. It's not France. So French people are not suffering. Spanish tourism is suffering. French tourism isn't, and that's why we believe there's a case here. If this was impacting on France and impacting on all airlines flying into France, well then, you know, maybe the case wouldn't be valid. But you have strike action in one country impacting on the freedom of movement for people living outside of that country. So it's affecting people flying into Spain, out of Spain, and around other countries. And as I said, when Marseille goes on strike, then it pushes problems into Brest and further up. And then, you know, as you heard at the beginning, it's not just the ATC strikes. We've got staff shortages, Karlsruhe having a huge impact. You know, and this is where the air traffic control air service provider has not provided adequate resources to deal with the volumes of flights, where they took a decision that, you know, flights through Europe were not going to increase, and therefore they didn't require more traffic controllers, they required fewer. So they don't have the staffing in place to deal with the volume of flights. So Karlsruhe can't control the number of flights that need to go through their airspace. So those flights are being pushed into other airspace providers. And the thing that's shocking about this is that they continue to get paid, despite the fact that they don't control the flight, because the payment is based on the original flight plan, or the flight plan. So if we have a flight that was planned originally to go through Karlsruhe airspace, but avoids it because of problems there, they're still getting paid for that. And this is ridiculous. These issues have got to be addressed. This system of air traffic control over Europe is broken and requires structural change.
Okay, two more questions. Gentleman in the blue in the back.
Two clarifications, please. This idea of using Eurocontrol to take over or take shares of the flights over 30,000 feet over France, whose decision? Is it French government? Is you expect the Commission to follow the French government? Second one, this figure over there is 400,000 people affected in the first half of the year. But I think I heard 750,000 before.
Some of that was
784,000 EU passengers have suffered flight cancellations so far up to the 17th of June in 2018.
This is just Marseille.
yeah.
Okay.
This is just cancellations due to Marseille.
So you know, what it doesn't measure, by the way, is, as Michael said, you know, there are then the knock-on effects of these delays. So the reroutings that you saw, when a flight, you know, goes and reroutes around out over the Atlantic, or what we call Tango 9 airway, it clearly takes a lot longer to fly. But that flight will have suffered an air traffic control delay as well. So it's not just the added time that the flight takes, the added fuel that's being burned, but it will have suffered an air traffic control delay at the beginning as well. And then it will probably suffer an air traffic control delay as it tries to do the next flight. So the knock-on effect of this is not something that's being adequately measured as well. So, you know, the actual level of disruption is well in excess of the figures that are being quoted.
And the answer to the first part of your question is that yes, we want the European overflights to be a European competence. There's no reason why Eurocontrol, I mean, the technology already exists for the British, the Irish, the Belgians, the Dutch, whoever it is, to operate or allow overflights over France during an ATC strike. We're not talking about a lot of flights, and you're not talking about a lot of ATC capacity. So any of those adjacent countries can operate the overflights. If you just let the other 4 French regions that aren't on strike with Marseille, they can operate it. The issue is somebody has to operate it. We don't care if the French have to start cancelling some of their domestic flights, as long as you protect the overflights. Because at least if you protect the overflight, you're adhering to one of the 4 fundamental treaties, fundamental principles of the Treaty of Rome, the free movement of people.
Gentleman in the white shirt.
Yes, today is 20th of June. I think tomorrow starts the summer. So we are really near this summer. And you are talking about a lot of things, but do you think that the situation is going to improve for this summer?
No, the situation will get worse. Because clearly as the volume of flights increase as we get into the peak summer, you know, our summer schedule starts at the end of March. But clearly, you know, the number of flights being operated will increase through June, July, August. The situation will get worse. There is no short-term solution to this other than if the Marseille strikes stop, that clearly would have a very significant positive impact.
Okay, last question.
But
Gentleman in blue.
we will still be dealing with the staff shortages in UK ATC, Karlsruhe. There is going to be a summer. Most of you who take a flight this summer will find your flight delayed because of ATC shortages and capacity restrictions.
Okay, one here, and then we close with the gentleman here.
Just a follow up on that. Do you know an estimation? Have you made an estimation how many passengers or flights can be affected in the summer, especially in Spain?
You take the first 5 months, 750,000 passengers. I mean, you would increase that in the second 5 months of the year, and then we'd still only be at the end of October. That's about more than 1.5 million passengers. Upwards of 2 million passengers this year are likely to have their flights cancelled. And remember, the European airline industry, if you take the case of Ryanair, like we cancel a flight today, we have a 95% load factor tomorrow, the day after, the day after. It's not like you can put them on another flight tomorrow. There's no seats. There's no seats on BA. Most of us are operating at very high load factors during the summer. So we're left in this ridiculous situation. We have to send you this, we're sorry, we can't get a slot, that flight is cancelled. Come back tomorrow, or it might be 2 days, 3 days, or 4 days. We also then have the right to care obligations under EU 261. So we have to put them up in hotels. We have to pay their hotels and their meal accommodation, which is fine. EU 261 says we can recover that from the people who caused the strike, except there's French legislation that gives immunity to French air traffic controllers from any recovery. So not alone do we have to cancel the flight, we have to pick up the costs, despite the fact that it is not the fault of the airlines.
Africa.
Airlines must afford the cost of the delays. So, are you thinking to propose to the Commission, the European Commission, you don't have to pay the cost of the delays?
No, we're not. It's clearly, you know, the EC 261 is there. It's established. We all know what the responsibilities are. You know, I'd love to have the option of recovering the cost from the people who caused the problem, because we don't cause the problem. But that option isn't, as Michael said, they're protected. But no, we're not proposing that. What we're proposing to the Commission is that they face up to the challenge of protecting the fundamental rights of European citizens. That's their responsibility. We want them to stand up and take responsibility for ensuring that people can exercise their freedom of movement and are not disrupted by these unnecessary and disproportionate action by a small group of people.
Okay, very quick, and then we're done.
So then, as part of the legal challenge, will there be financial recourse? I mean, is that an element of this?
You know, to be honest, financial recourse is not the focus of this. What we want is our people to be able to operate in an environment that is efficient. You know, this impacts on the people that work for us and it impacts on the people we serve. And we want those people to be able to travel on the flights that they booked at the time that they booked the flight and not to have their flights disrupted unnecessarily by these actions. So that's the focus. You know, that's the genuine focus here. We're not trying to avoid any responsibilities that we have. We're trying to put the focus where the focus should be. This is a political problem that should be addressed by politicians. It's not an airline problem. It's a political problem that needs to be addressed by the politicians. And they need to stand up and start taking action. We require, as we're right to require, Europe to address and to honour the commitments that they have to protect citizens in Europe and ensure that the rights that they have are rights that they can fully exercise.
And in that, we need to help here the media. Like, you're going to see through the summer long delays, flight cancellations, passengers stuck, and the airlines are going to be getting the blame. We need to get it out there. It's air traffic control is what's causing this, and the lethargy or inaction of the European Commission and national governments in failing to tackle this issue is what fundamentally to blame. So we need to apply as much pressure as we can. IAG and Ryanair will do it legally, but we also need to use the good offices of the press to kind of air this issue and why aren't the governments and the European Commission tackling this? We've given them the solution. What we need now is action.
So I think Luke.
Thank you all for coming. You're all invited outside to join us outside for our summer reception. And thank you again for coming.
Thanks, everybody. Yes.